It is my joy, my privilege to introduce to you Dr. Matthew Moser. He is an award-winning teacher, having taught the Bible, theology, and great books at Baylor University, Loyola University, Maryland, the Honors College of Azusa Pacific University, and currently he is a professor at our own Eastern University. So we're so grateful he's here today. He publishes widely in the fields of theology and literature, especially on Dante, who you're going to be hearing more about today. And he loves topics such as imagination, contemplation, moral formation, and holy reading, Lectio Divina. He is the author of Love Itself is Understanding, and he also is the author of the forthcoming Dante's Three Journeys, an Introduction to the Divine Comedy's Theological Imagination. He's also currently researching the theologies of the imagination and the role of poetry in moral formation, so you can tell why I love this guy. So a little bit about him directly from his own words, which this is on the Eastern website. I absolutely love what he has to say here. So Matt writes, "There are few things that I love more than teaching. Having the opportunity to work with thoughtful, creative, and interesting students is truly one of the great joys of life." And Dr. Moser teaches in the Templeton program and school at Eastern. So he says, "In Templeton, I get to journey with students through the Bible as we explore some of the most fundamental questions of the human experience. Who is God? How do we live well in the world that God has created? What is sin? What is salvation?" What makes Templeton so special, however, is that we also get to explore these questions in conversation with other great thinkers like Aristotle, Plato, Dante, Augustine, Teresa of Avila, Flannery O'Connor, Anna Julia Cooper, and many, many others. We don't read these authors and discuss their books for the sake of knowledge that, to quote Paul, puffs up, but rather to help our students become wise, compassionate, flourishing people whose loves build up others. I'm especially interested in the role of the imagination in intellectual and moral formation, and how the imagination can help us to know God. All of my classes bring together theology, literature, and the arts to draw all of us, professors and students alike, into the holy work of coming to know and to love the true, the good, and the beautiful. Please join me in giving a warm welcome to Dr. Matthew Moser.
Thank you, everybody, for being here. Thank you for welcoming me into your space. This is my second time at St. Thomas. I was able to visit over Christmas, and I have been so eager to come back because the church and the service and the community here are so beautiful. So thank you for welcoming me into your space. Can we begin with just a word of prayer, a quick word of prayer? May the words of our mouths and the meditations of all of our hearts be pleasing to you, our God and our Redeemer. Amen. So as Father Dave mentioned, the subtext of all of that was I am a huge nerd. And so I really love talking about theology, I love talking about the Bible, I love talking about 14th century Italian poetry, like Dante, so you can understand that I was incredibly popular in high school. But it's really fun because you get to come to churches and you get to talk to other people who are interested in these kind of things. So thank you for being here, even though the topics of virtue and vices and 14th century poetry aren't exactly maybe the most crowd-grabbing topics. But what I really want to start with, before we get into vice and sin and all of that heavy stuff, and before we get into Dante, is I want to start with just a kind of central claim. And that is a claim about love. And that claim is that love is not just something that we feel, it's not even just something that we do, it is most fundamentally something that we are. To say that we are love is a kind of riff off of that central claim that the book of Genesis begins with when God, who 1 John tells us is love, makes us in God's own image. And so the love that we are is an image and a reflection of the love that God is. And I find that to be the most helpful kind of framework for talking about virtue, but also talking about vice. Because it's very easy, especially for those of us who have grown up in a kind of an American Christianity that's very moralistic, to think that what we're doing in Lent, what we're doing in the Christian life, is checking moral boxes so that we can get the reward of heaven, or checking immoral boxes. Is that a thing? Checking immoral boxes so we can kind of get to hell. Whereas the Christian tradition has from its beginning enfolded the question of moral action within the larger framework of it's about who and what we are created to be. Our moral action has to be directed, ordered to our sharing in the love that God is. So that's kind of the framework that I want to use to kind of explore virtues and vices with a little help, i.e. a lot of help from Dante. One other just kind of preliminary thing, why Dante? The question, I think, doesn't make a ton of sense. My question is, why not Dante? Dante, 14th century Italian poet. If you speak Italian, or if you have heard Italian, or if you have gone to Olive Garden, all of these things are in some way deeply tied back to Dante. His poem, The Divine Comedy, which is a 14,233-line poem about a guy's journey through the medieval afterlife, through hell, through purgatory, and through heaven, is so influential globally, historically, that the dialect that he wrote in became the basis for modern Italian because of the popularity of this. So he is an incredible cultural artifact, but I think he's also a wonderful Christian artifact, because nobody that I know has so captured the Christian life in such vivid, imaginative forms. There's a Dante scholar up at Yale Divinity School who said, you have nothing to lose by coming to Dante's Divine Comedy, except perhaps life as you have known it thus far, which is a big claim for a book, for a poem. I have found it to be true, though. I think one of the reasons why reading poetry, reading Dante in particular, is really helpful is because he embodies all of these Christian ideas that we hear about. We hear doctrine, we hear good preaching, we read the Bible. Dante takes all of that and he ties it to a story of struggle, of growth, of transformation, of love, of friendship, and it just helps it kind of take on flesh. So what I want to do with Dante today is I want to look at these moral questions about virtue and vice and see how does he take these kind of conceptual categories and actually dramatize them a bit, and how that might help us in the drama of our own lives. Does that make any sense? We're good? Okay, cool. Last kind of preliminary thing is, let me just say a word about virtues and vices. This is not exactly like sexy language to talk about virtue. I'm a virtuous person. Wow, gosh, fantastic, sign me up. Or I'm a vicious person. And yet the virtues and vice tradition is a really hallowed, really esteemed moral framework within the Christian tradition. It kind of emerged with Aristotle several hundred years before Christ. He was a pagan Greek philosopher. He wrote a book called the Nicomachean Ethics, which he really develops a theory of virtue and vice. And what Aristotle says is that virtue, the point of virtue, is that it leads us to happiness. Not pleasure, happiness. His word is eudaimonia. And what he means by happiness or eudaimonia is the fulfillment, the completion, and the perfection of what we are as human creatures. What does it mean to be human? What does a flourishing human life look like? That's what virtue leads us to. This became incredibly influential through the history of Christianity. If you have heard of the 7 deadly sins tradition, that emerges out of this virtues tradition. It's big through the ancient Christian church, through the medieval church, and then it kind of falls away, and we start moving into different kind of moral frameworks about concepts, frameworks about moral principles. And it's not until the middle of the 20th century that four women at Oxford University kind of rediscovered and rehabilitated the virtues tradition. They are Elizabeth Anscombe, Philippa Foot, Mary Midgley, and Iris Murdoch. These philosophers reclaimed, rediscovered the virtue tradition, reinterpreted it for our modern day, and Christianity has, in a sense, rediscovered some of its own moral heritage and has been working with virtues and vice tradition in new and exciting ways ever since. It is one of those traditions that is both very ancient but always new. Virtues and vices are not simply about doing the right thing. Virtues and vices are about habits of character. They are about formation. They're about forming not just what we do, but who we are. The virtues and vices tradition make the assumption that our actions flow out of our character. And so a virtue is an established habit of character that leads to integration of ourselves, to transformation, and to flourishing, and ultimately leads to happiness. Within the Christian mind, happiness has been understood as union with God. You might hear our Catholic brothers and sisters talking about the beatific vision of God. Beatific, happy. The happy vision of God, but the vision of God that makes us happy, that brings us to completion and to fulfillment. A vice, on the other hand, is an established habit of character that leads to disintegration. What's the opposite of flourishing? Deflourishing, decaying, and malformation. But that language of habit is really, really important. What we want, I hope, is we want somebody that doesn't just do good things kind of by accident, but knows what to do in any situation that presents itself. The example that I always use is I have a colossal fear of flying. And I want a virtuous pilot up there. I want a pilot who knows what they're doing. Something goes wrong, I do not want a pilot who's like, hey, hand me that so you want to be an airline pilot textbook. Chapter 1, yeah. I want a pilot flying the plane, not flying by the seat of their pants. I want a pilot who has a situation present itself and they know exactly what to do. It's just instinct. It's a second nature. And that's in fact the language that Aristotle, these Oxonian women, they all use to talk about virtue. Virtue is a second nature. We practice it and it becomes part of who we are. Again, in this Christian tradition, the role of virtue is to lead us to happiness, the happiness that is sharing in God's own life. The effect of vice, it's not punishment of sin, but it is sin is its own punishment. Because it is taking us away from the very thing that we are made for. I grew up on the East Coast, and for 2 years, I lived in Southern California, 2020 to 2022. Not the best time to move across the country. And the was just something in me. I was like, California has all kinds of great things going on, but it's not home. That's what vices are. They're taking us away from our home with God and our home with ourselves. So for the Christian tradition, the goal of virtue is to share more perfectly in the love that God is. And so this reframes morality away from reward and punishment towards health and wholeness of what we are and what we are created to be. It's about healing our loves. Okay, let me pause there. That was my kind of like prelim stuff. Did any of that make sense? Any conversation we want to have about any of that? Any kind of like pushback, dispute, throat shoes, anything like that? Yeah.
And the timing of that happiness is now, right, with the virtues, as opposed to in the by and by, the heavenly happiness.
Yeah, that's such a great question. When does this happiness happen? I think in the virtues tradition, it is always happening and always coming.
It's the kingdom of God.
The kingdom of God is within you, and our Father, who art in heaven, thy kingdom come. So the theologians will talk about the already but not yet of the kingdom of God. That's here. God's kingdom is here already, but it's not yet here in its fullness. And I think you could kind of map that on to our happiness as well. Yeah. I saw one other. Yeah.
Is there a relationship between this and our founding fathers' idea of pursuit of happiness? They were deists, however. A great question. Is there a relationship between this understanding of happiness and that of life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness? I don't know that I feel confident enough to say anything about their original intentions. My hunch is they're probably thinking about happiness much more in the way we tend to think about happiness today, which is about what brings kind of personal pleasure and the fulfillment of pleasure for us. Something that can be kind of conceived a bit individualistically. And I don't know, but... When they were deists.
But they were deists. Yeah.
Christians.
Yeah.
The idea of love wasn't there.
Yeah, certainly not the idea of our loves being what unites us to God's love. Yeah. A deist God is not one that's particularly involved in the world after getting it started. Yeah. Good. All right, let me pick up and kind of bring Dante into this. Dante is, well, how many of us know anything about Dante? Do I need to do just a little kind of like dress rehearsal of him? Yeah. Would that be helpful? Okay, great. All right. Oh, twist my arm, gosh. Okay. Dante was a love poet in 14th century Italy. He lived in Florence. He was baptized to Christian in the baptistry of St. John, which was right in front of the Duomo in Florence. He was part of the kind of leadership of Florence, took on a kind of political role, rose to be one of the 7 priors of the city of Florence. Like, people were like, this guy writes good love poetry, let's put him in charge. Oh, the happier days. Oh, the happier days, yeah. And when I say happier days, I mean they were actually very sad because Dante had all kinds of conflict in Italy. He was betrayed by his citymen and the Pope, who conspired against him. He was exiled from Florence, never allowed to return, under fear of being burned alive if he was ever spotted within Florentine territory again. And so he spent all of the rest of his life in exile. While he was in exile, this great love poet tried to write a bunch of other books. He tried to write a philosophy of language. He abandoned that in the middle of a sentence.
He tried to write a 24-book of philosophy, educational philosophy. He abandoned that after a couple of books. But then something happened. We don't really know what happened. But he had this inspiration, and he wrote something that he calls his comedy, in which he takes himself, he makes himself the main character, and gives this literary Dante a journey to undergo. The pilgrim Dante, wakes up in a dark wood, filled with terror, horrors. He says death itself could scarce be more bitter. He wakes up in a point of crisis. And he is about to just kind of lay down and die. Just give it all up. But then 3 women up in heaven see him and take pity on him. And they send the ancient Roman poet Virgil. They pull him out of hell. And they say, go help us, guy. And so Virgil guides Dante in this narrative on this journey that's going to save his soul. And this journey is to go down deep into the depths of hell, so-called 9 circles of hell, where he has this kind of moral education that he's getting. He looks at, what is sin and what does sin do to the soul? After that, he and Virgil escape from hell, and they come up on the other side of the planet, and there they have a mountain, the mountain of purgatory. And the mountain of purgatory is also made up of levels, and Dante and Virgil have to climb this mountain, and each level of this mountain is associated with a different vice. And these vices are being therapeutically healed. And Dante witnesses their healing, and he has to undergo that healing so that these vices that he deals with can be pulled out of him. At the top of the mountain of purgatory is the Garden of Eden. The moral journey of purgatory up the mountain is to overcome vice, to become virtuous as a restoration of our original human innocence. That's the end of Purgatorio, second part. Then Dante's poetic muse, a woman named Beatrice, she shows up and she says, now that you have been poetically healed, your journey is not over. It's not just about moral innocence. Now we need to ascend through the heavens until you can go and you can see God face to face. And that's what the third book, called Paradise, is about. So that's kind of the journey. Did that kind of work? Did that make sense? Okay, great. I'm going to focus on what Dante's doing in Purgatory, not because Dante necessarily is giving us a doctrine of purgatory, but Dante says purgatory is the best picture of the Christian life. Because the Christian life should be about growth. It should be about transformation. It should be about healing. It should be about our loves, which are disordered, becoming properly ordered. Dante does not believe that all love is good love. Dante thinks, this may be a little controversial, that love can sometimes be bad. And so the way that Dante arranges his mountain of purgatory morally, it's divided into 7 different levels that are grouped in 3 different categories. And they're all about love. So the whole healing of purgatory, what Dante is saying, the purpose of the Christian life is to take our loves that have become disordered and allow God through grace and through spiritual discipline to heal them and properly order them so that our loves here on earth can become a sign or a pathway that takes us directly to the love that God is. So these are the types of love that Dante thinks are the ways that our loves can kind of go wrong. The first way that our loves can go wrong is that they can be misdirected. Misdirected loves. They are misdirected because Dante's assumption is that love is by nature ecstatic. Ecstatic means it goes out of itself towards something else. Sin, however, is curling in on itself. Dante is thinking about St. Augustine, who famously describes sin as being incurvatus in se, curved in on itself. It shrinks us. It reduces us. It robs us of our humanity, of our relationships, and ultimately our connection and union with God. If you think about God being love, one of the first things that we know about God in the Bible is that God's love is ecstatic. It goes out of God's self in and as creation. Sin is sucking everything in, swallowing it up in your own ego. So for Dante, the first thing that can go wrong with love is it can be misdirected. Rather than being ecstatic, it can move inward. And he says that takes typically 3 different forms. 3 different vices are kind of expressions of this misdirected love. Pride, envy, and wrath. Pride, envy, and wrath. These are the 3 forms of misdirected love. Quick pause here maybe would be helpful. Because in our world today, we do talk a lot about the importance of self-love. That's not really what Dante's rejecting here. Dante's not rejecting the idea of healthy, good self-love. He's rejecting the kind of self-love that puts self in competition with neighbor. So pride does that. In the Latin tradition, pride is called superbia, right? You can kind of hear what pride is about. Pride isn't thinking well of yourself, it's thinking about yourself over others in a superb way to others. Humility, by contrast, the virtue that counters the vice of pride, is not thinking badly of yourself, it's thinking truthfully of yourself. It's not pride for me to say, I am very good at parallel parking. That's humility. It's celebrating and recognizing one's own excellence. But if I'm...
Ali said it ain't bragging if it's true.
It ain't bragging if it's true. There you go. But it could be pride if that truthful bragging is bragging so as to diminish neighbor. True humility for Dante, and I think for the Christian tradition, is going to be expansive. When I feel really confident in my parallel parking abilities, when I see another really good parallel parker, oh gosh, I just want to celebrate. I just want to rejoice. I get a little lightheaded, right? It's just so wonderful. But if I'm insecure, if I'm proud in my parallel parking, and anybody who threatens that threatens some sort of deeply held sense of identity myself. Humility opens us up. Pride puffs us up so that we can't actually be in relationship with our neighbor. Envy. Oh, envy. This is my chief vice personally, so none of these are going to be personal examples at all. Thomas Aquinas once said, of all of the vices, envy is the only one that's not fun. And that is just so true. It's so true. I'm so annoyed that I got stuck with the boring one. Envy. We often kind of think about envy today as being just another word for jealousy. But in the Christian tradition, jealousy is actually something quite different. Jealousy is about a thing. I want that car. I want that water bottle. I want those shoes. Envy, however, uses the thing as kind of like the justification for actually hating and resenting the person who's enjoying it. Envy is hatred at another's good. Doesn't that just cut like so deep?
It's like more malicious than jealousy.
What's that?
It's more malicious than jealousy.
Oh, it's exponentially more malicious than jealousy. I think that's exactly right. Because envy doesn't matter about the car or the shoes or the water bottle. It's how come that person, how come they get it? And what's the other part of that sentence? And I don't. The first murder in the Bible, Cain and Abel, that's the vice of envy. That's what envy does. Envy hates. Envy kills. For Dante in his Italian, when he's going up this area where he has to be kind of purged of envy, what he sees is people who have their eyes stitched shut with copper wire. That's their therapy. And there's kind of two things going on there with that therapy. The one is, it's not punishment. It's not punishment. It's not just like, oh, you're envious. We're going to smack you down a little bit. This is supposed to be doing some sort of good for you. So why have your eyes stitched together if you really suffer with envy? Well, in Italian, in Latin, the word for envy is invidia. If you know anything about these languages, you might hear videre, to see. Envy is the inability to see our neighbor. It's a form of self-blinding. And so, by having our eyes sealed shut, we are cutting ourselves off. But also what Dante does is these people, they're on the side of a mountain, and there's a whole crowd of them that are being healed from envy. And when they have their eyes stitched shut, I don't know how many of you have been on the side of a mountain at night, there is always a chance that you could fall off. And so what these people have to do with their eyes stitched shut is they have to lean against each other's backs. They have to perform an act of charity for their neighbor. They have to learn how to rely and trust their neighbor simply in order to survive. Rather than envy, which says, it's me versus the world. Dante's kind of point here in these things is just this beautiful, beautiful expression, bless you, is this beautiful expression that no sin is absolute. And no sin is more powerful, no vice is more powerful than virtue. And every sin comes with its own healing, its own therapy. And so Dante is understood as the great poet of Christian hope. Because Dante doesn't look at even the most vicious person and says, you've gone too far. Instead, he's like, there are painful processes that are going to go deep into your soul, into your mind, into your affections, and dig them up, churn them up, so that you can be healed. I always give this example. I have a scar on the side of my hand from years and years ago. I was living in an apartment, and we didn't have a dishwasher, or I was the dishwasher, and my roommate had left a cup of milk out for a couple of days. And there was just, you kind of know the ring of milk at the bottom, and it's just disgusting. And so I just had my hands deep in that glass, trying to get this milk out, and obviously, like, I'm really buff and powerful, and so I just shattered it, right, with my own just raw strength, and glass went up and cut the side of my hand open. So I went to the hospital and said, help please. And they said, hey, before we stitch you up, we need to do an x-ray to see if there are any shards of glass in the wound. Turns out there were. I was like, okay, now what? And they're like, well, we're going to take those out. I was like, do you have to? And they're like, if you want your hand, yes. And it was not a pleasant experience. I don't need to go into any details. But they had to get those wounds out, those things that were consistently hurting me that if left untreated would do damage to my whole body. And it hurt. That's Dante's understanding of the Christian wrestling with virtue. Is there are therapies that God gives us through God's grace, but they hurt. But they're not aimed to punish us, but to heal us. So pride and envy, wrath. Wrath isn't just being angry. Wrath is wishing harm to another in response to a perceived harm that they did me. So for me, my silly example, which is actually not very silly, is anytime somebody's driving the speed limit in the left-hand lane, right? Because I deal with that every single time. Because when you think about it, it's not anger. I'm angry at stuff that's happening in parts of our world. And I think rightly, because that's about how other people are getting hurt. Wrath, when I'm driving, it's all about me, right? You see these forms of misdirected love. In the interest of time, let me just kind of move on to the second category of disordered love that Dante talks about. Dante talks about misdirected loves, and he also talks about deficient love. Loving the right thing, not enough. And the vice that he attaches to this one is the vice of sloth. And this is another vice where our kind of like contemporary version of it is really weak sauce. Right? We often think about sloth in terms of what? Laziness. Being lazy, right? Huh, that is so American of us, right? Sloth in the Christian tradition is the failure to love what we ought. The failure to love what we ought. Or the failure to love something the way it needs to be loved. I will give you again a silly example. I am a dog person. I have been hurt by cats in the past. I do not like cats. I don't understand why they exist. I'm sorry. I know I've lost like half of you now. That is sloth on my part. Because I am failing to recognize the goodness and the beauty of cats as God's creatures. More seriously, when I'm in a big fight with my partner, and I go to the one side of the house and I cross my arms and I say, I'm not going to apologize. Why should I apologize? I'm always the one who apologizes. She should apologize for once. Why doesn't she do that? I'm not being diligent in my love. I'm not having zeal in my love. My love is being used in a kind of like a limited way. My love for her should be spilling out and working towards reconciliation. Instead, I want to hold it back and stuff it down. I'm not directing it at myself, but I'm holding it back.
I've measured out my life in coffee spoons.
I've measured out my life in coffee spoons. Yes. Well, just the dishwasher's right there. Just like put it in. Put the coffee cup in the dishwasher. Or how often are we slothful in our approach to those who have hurt us. In Jesus' radical call of loving your enemy, or our political opponents, or that person on the church committee that has all of the wrong ideas all of the time. Or the environment. And perhaps even how much to God, God's self. I am so deeply slothful in my love for God. I didn't go to church a couple of weeks ago because it was, quote, too cold out. Dante wants to counter sloth with zeal. His image of the slothful being healed is people in a marathon. They're just running and running and running and running because they are so overwhelmed with a focus on the object of their love that it propels them forward. Their love is like a magnet that draws them forward. The third type of misdirected love, the third type of disordered love is excessive love. This is when we love good things maybe a little bit too much.
Like chocolate.
Like chocolate.
Obsession.
There are three types here. There's gluttony, there's avarice, greed for money, and then there's lust for sex. Dante insists all of these things, food, drink, chocolate, sex, money, these are all good gifts that God has given us to enjoy and to use well. They should be celebrated, they should be enjoyed. Praise be to God should be on our lips with these things. But it is always so easy for us to overinflate their significance. Gluttony is a good one. Because gluttony, again, in the Christian tradition is a little bit different. We think it's about eating too much, right? Having too much chocolate. If you're a college student, going out on Friday night, or Thursday night, or Tuesday night, and having too much to drink before your 9 a.m. class. That is one form of gluttony, too much. Gluttony can also express itself in having too refined a taste. So I love a good craft beer. My brother, however, only drinks, it's only Miller time for him. And so whenever I go over to my brother's house, he says, "Would you like a beer?" And my response to him is often gluttonous because it is, "I don't drink that." I am causing a rift in a relationship with my brother because his hospitality is not up to my standards. To look around our world and to receive the gifts that God has given us at our tables, and to not turn that back into gratitude and thanksgiving. That can be an expression of this vice. The vices are just so very subtle. They work in all of the little cracks in our lives and our personalities. What does Dante give us? If he's setting out all of these problems, he gives us kind of two things. One, he insists on the power of the imagination as one of God's gifts to help us address virtue and vice in our lives. And he says one of the great powers of the imagination is to see a form and let it imprint itself in your mind. That's his understanding of imagination. You see something out there and you carry the image of it in your head going forward. Dante thinks the imagination can be very formative for us morally because I can see a virtuous person and I can love something in them and find something lovable and desirable in them, and I can carry that image with me and it can shape my loves. I want to be more like Father Dave or Mother Amy or Dante. We also have all of these images of vice. I mean, good gracious, just watch reality TV, and you have so many profound visions of vice that I hope also address our loves, because it disabuses us of the kind of romantic picture we create of our vices. I do this with my students all of the time. I ask them, like, what's the greatest love story of their generation? And they're like, The Notebook, or Titanic, which is the Notebook on a boat. And I'm like, all of those stories, they're the exact same. They're all about cheating. And I was like, not a single one of you would want this love story as your own. And they're like, but it's so romantic. I was like, yes, this is the romanticized version that we can dress our vices up in. But one of the great things that reading Dante can give us is it can help us see these things for what they really are. And in that, the imagination is a powerful gift of grace that God has given us to carry these images to help shape our lives. The other thing that Dante insists, and I think this is a kind of beautiful point to wrap up my comment, is he gives us the moral power of friendship. Aristotle in his Ethics said the truest form of friendship are those friends that spur us on to virtue. St. Paul does this. In John, Jesus says to the disciples, I no longer call you slaves, I call you friends. There's something about friendship that's not like this kind of cheesy greeting card kind of thing, but it's a really powerful force in our lives. Dante doesn't make his journey alone. He has Virgil, who literally carries him sometimes. We need to be carried. Rowan Williams, the former Archbishop of Canterbury, the greatest eyebrows in all of Christendom. Google him if you don't get that joke. You will see exactly what I mean. Says, part of our spiritual good is learning a non-disabling dependence on each other. Not one where we just kind of surrender ourselves, but a dependence in which it is mutual, that it is empowering, but I recognize that I'm not a Lone Ranger Christian doing this on my own. On the mountain of Purgatory, Dante meets this guy named Marco. Not that one called the Lombard, so not Polo. He meets, it's not Marco Lombard, it's a guy named Statius. Sorry. Statius comes up behind Dante, kind of like as a kind of like image bearer of Christ. And he comes up after the whole mountain they're on has shaken. There's been an earthquake. There's been this earthquake that's happened when the whole mountain, every voice, every person on that mountain who's going through purgatory, overcoming their vices, and becoming virtuous, they all shout out hallelujah to such an extent that the whole mountain shakes. And Dante asks about this, and he says, oh, that's what the community of those souls being purged do when one person overcomes one of their vices. The whole mountain shakes with rejoicing. And I think what a beautiful picture of the church that is and can be. When we are accompanying each other, carrying each other, giving us images that will cultivate our love, overcome our false loves, but that we are in this to celebrate. And we shout hallelujah. Thanks for having me.
Matt, when you teach that wisely and powerfully, you know you're going to be back. So we're so grateful for your wisdom today. Thank you so much. God bless you and have a wonderful week.